Now I want to turn to Dr. Rebecca Gunnlaugsson. Dr. Gunnlaugsson, the way we fund education in South Carolina, and I should note to the desk, this is another slide presentation, so I think they're ready for you. The way we fund education in South Carolina, and I see a number of legislators present. Welcome, I see some of you have come in, glad to have you. The way we fund education in South Carolina, simple, elegant, efficient. Oh, wait a minute, I've got the wrong script. Not exactly the way it's done. But you're going to take us through the various education funding sources and explain to us how it works and maybe give us some hints on how the formula we have we might could use as a way to make things better. So turn it over to you. Welcome.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to stand up so I can actually look back and see.
You can come here. If you want.
Well, this will be fine. Yes, so I'm very fortunate to have the most interesting part of the presentation, talking about education and finance. So I will try not to put you to sleep. Right here you will see just a very high-level diagram of South Carolina's education funding supply chain. And as confusing as this looks, this is a very simplistic model, because within each of those bubbles, there are even more bubbles that deal with specific mandates or specific programs or specific spending restrictions. So just in general, about federal funds make up about 10% of our budget, and state and local are relatively close at 44 and 46%. And don't worry, I'm not going to make you we're not going to go into details of each of these, but what I do want to do, if you don't mind advancing to the next slide, please. Orrin had asked, if there's one thing I can do while I'm here, is please explain how the Education Finance Act works. And that is what we consider the primary funding source for education in the state. And so it starts with, and this was created back in 1977. So it starts with a weighted pupil unit, which is basically a count of how many students are in a district, weighted by certain factors like handicaps that might have a higher weight. And back then they actually weighted by grade levels. They gave certain grade levels different higher weights than other grade levels. So basically a count of students. Next, that's multiplied by the basic cost to educate those students. And that's based on how much a teacher's salary costs, how much other maintenance, operations, media services, etc. So that right there forms the basis of the Education Finance Act, which sounds pretty simple. Number of students times the cost to educate them. The next portion is how they determine which portions of the Education Finance Act that number is attributed to the district. So they have this thing called the Index of Tax-Paying Ability, which basically looks at the property tax base of the county and divides it by the property tax base of the entire state. So smaller counties have to pay less, and larger, richer counties would necessarily pay more. And then the state determined, they multiplied by 30%, because the state determined that on average, districts should pay about 30% of the education budget, and there you have the local share of the Education Finance Act funding, and the state would pick up the rest. Well, that actually sounds like a pretty straightforward way to do things. So what's wrong with that? So first of all, just the sheer size of the EFA. It started off back in 1977. It was a fairly low amount, and a lot of things were left out of that formula. And over time, the inflation factor that's been used on that has been smaller than actual inflation. So today, it accounts for a very, very small portion of the overall state education budget. Also, the calculations. They were created in 1977. A lot has changed since then. We have a lot of new technologies. We see that people from disadvantaged backgrounds or from poverty might deserve different types of weightings than students from very wealthy districts. Also, the base student cost did not include things like transportation or facilities or employee benefits, or a number of other things. So there are a number of things that could be updated in the calculations. And then finally, consistency. The General Assembly is not under any obligation to actually fully fund that. And in fact, since 1978, it's only been funded 8 times fully. And for instance, in fiscal year 14, the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office calculated that the EFA should be approximately $2,700 per pupil, and it was only funded at $2,100 per pupil. So in addition to the Education Finance Act, there's also you saw in that bubble chart, there were so many other funding mechanisms that are going on, and a lot of those are variable funding mechanisms. For instance, lottery revenues. Some years they get revenues of 100 million, some years they get revenues of 30 million. So that's very variable. Also, the Education Improvement Act in 1984 is based on a 1% sales tax. So if you look at sales tax over years through recessions, they can go up and down as well. So you have these variable funding sources, but then a lot of these are actually dealing with fixed spending. So there's very specific programs, and there's a lot of very, very specific programs that are mandates that each district has to spend the money on, whether they need that or not. And the big problem with that huge, big bubble of complexity is that it creates complexity. And the more complex that it is, the more calculations you have to do, the harder it is for normal people to be, and really even for anybody, to be able to track all of these spending, and you lack transparency. And finally, just administrative costs. The number of calculations that just are made by the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office to offset a number of property tax reimbursements, or calculate teacher supplements to bring our teachers up to Southeast average. That's one specific part of the Education Improvement Act, is to calculate a teacher supplement so that all the teachers, so we can bring our salary average up. But all of those make a great deal of administrative cost. And so I want to spend the last bit of time talking about property tax, because normally we think of schools and we think of them being funded by property tax, and that's at the local level. And on that big bubble chart, you saw Act 388, and you saw 3 different Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 of property tax relief. So what's happened is, starting in 1994 and culminating in 2006, is that the state has taken away the ability for schools to levy taxes on primary homeowners, in probably an effort to alleviate districts from providing the money themselves and allowing the state to provide more, and from making sure that homeowners' taxes, property taxes, do not skyrocket. But what it's done is it's shifted the tax burden from homeowners to other people that are left, and that's been primarily renters and commercial properties. And so it's not just the owners of the rental properties or the commercial properties, it's the people who are actually renting an apartment, or a small business who is actually renting a shop front. They're the ones that get the cost passed on to them. And the problem is, it's actually failed to stop property tax increases over time. And if you look, I love to show all these comparisons, but since 1993, which is about the time the very first Property Tax Relief Act went into effect, the very first chart, the very first little bars is state population. We've had a 30% increase in state population since then. Inflation has gone up 63%. Inflation plus population, which is sort of our norm of all growth, has gone up 94%. State GDP has gone up 145%. State personal income, 168%. And then we get to total property tax revenue has gone up 173%. So more than state GDP, more than population plus inflation, more than state personal income. And then the very last two I'm trying to break down so you can see. The next one is 165%. That's the increase in owner-occupied residential property tax. They have gone up anyway, despite property tax relief. And then the last one that's commercial and rental. As the property tax burden has gotten shifted, it's really hammered the rental and commercial properties, and they are the ones that are absorbing most of the increases in property tax. So, next slide. So going forward, what are some ideas? Well, going back to that very student-centric model that we saw at the very beginning, where we take the number of students and we multiply it by the base cost, that would be a return to that type of simplicity where the money actually is allotted to the specific student. Sorry, do you mind one more? And then next, redefining the way we share costs between state and local, because what's happened as those property tax laws have taken place and we've shifted the burden, the smaller counties who have less of a tax base have a much harder time raising money. So right now we have millage rates that are ranging in our state from 300 in larger counties to over 600 in smaller counties. So we're really impacting these smaller counties with forcing them to really raise property taxes. And then finally, simplifying and stabilizing the funding formula and getting rid of all of those different bubbles and going back to something simple with funding sources that don't rely on variable funding sources but are much more stable going forward.
Thank you very much.